So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it will be mostly about decisions we make when we start a new project or when we want to migrate or we want to refactor. And maybe sometimes you take a decision to onboard new people in a team and you want to get a fresh start of the product. But also it helps a lot when you start a new from scratch. One of the main problems or the first questions to ask is what you're gonna build and also how that is going to be deployed, distributed. And there are a few things that you will be doing over and over again, not only in one project, but even if it's in different frameworks, in different, like even if it's from vanilla JavaScript, you need to take care of a few bits and pieces over and over again. The one would be like if you create a REST API, if you create what's going to be the project's file structure, taking care of caching, the assets you're going to use if it's the client-side application that you want to bundle it, how you set up your debugging environment, styles and CSS in that, like how they're going to be mixed and matched. And you want to keep everything consistent in a way, even if you believe one project can be actually one product will be many projects from Git coming together. So you should try to get as much consistency as possible, even though that could come from different teams sometimes. Still, it's good to have some sort of a common way of thinking, and that will help the collaboration and also like between teams communication. One of the first questions would be how you pick what tool you're going to use and frameworks. And initially, what comes to mind usually would be the popularity, but we have seen that changing over, like within a few years or a few months. You can see some coming up and some others vanishing or changing a lot, with massive breaking changes. That is like jumping to the next version would be a whole new pile of work. Also, we see the support communities around these. Like if they're quite popular, usually they have a lot of support. The documentation, how much effort you need as a new joiner in that community, in that framework, to go from 0 to 100. Like how fast can you do that, and how efficient that can be, and also how understandable that is. I mean, most of the times you just run one command and you can see everything running behind the scenes or with some output on the terminal, and you get a massive, huge load of files and everything. And then it's really meaningful if you do understand what happens behind the scenes. Because the more automation, the more of the previous tasks that we mentioned are getting automatically done for you, wrapped in a wrapper under a wrapped environment, then the least you understand. And then if you need something more specifically, like more explicitly to do, it gets really, really hard. At least if you understand what happens behind the scenes, that makes it faster to get the context and do the changes you like. And also another important thing would be after this, those were the design patterns that you need to understand. The other important thing would be the integrations with other tools, because as I mentioned earlier, each one of those frameworks or tools that you're going to be using needs to interact with other parts of your deployment process. That would be either the GitHub Actions that we saw earlier, other third-party tools, or even Jira and other like tracking tools that you can that can help you with your processes. But no matter what you pick, I would say if you build it in a very nice way that can be modular, and also each part of the project be more independent, that can help a lot. So I would say to pick whatever helps the developer build it faster. That would be the number one, and build around some basic principles. Let's get a little bit deeper, but not too much, about the frameworks and tools that we usually see around. So In a recent experience, I wanted to start a new project, and I didn't want to go through what I already knew, but I wanted to take that as in this new role that I have. I wanted to get something new to learn as well. So I decided to have a quick look, and I saw that it's even worse than it was before on this kind of tools that you have available, and also the comparisons and blog posts and everything around which one I should pick. And it's a matter of presentation, I would say, like whatever was presented better, I was about to pick that one. And yes, of course, I picked the one that you can see on the top. But that still doesn't change the way that I was working before, that I would like to see a structure of the projects that keeps everything independent. So in the future, you can actually detach, not being highly coupled with one of the frameworks or a specific tool. So if you see all the available out there, frameworks, React, Vue, Angular, Ember, I just really randomly picked a few of them there. I haven't even seen some of them. All of them, they have the good and bad parts that are the same pros and cons. About the community, the learning curve, the full stack support, every one of them is trying to get that. There are a few small differences and some architectural differences that will make the difference for you. Some might be more convenient, some others not. But the main problem is when you decide to start, if you go with the popularity and all that, it might lead you into using a framework or some tools that are massive, and you might not even need it. So that's why the most important part would be to get something that you understand, and then build from there in a way that you can easily change in the future. Here's a graph actually that I found really interesting that you can get from npmtrends.com. And it shows you the downloads that are happening when it was updated, because you do need to make sure that it's an ongoing project once you adopt one of the frameworks and tools that we have available. And it also gives the mini the zipped file, the size. It's a really good comparison tool, but still it will not be a direct answer for you that this is the one that you should go for, because it highly depends on the project that you want to build. You don't want to get a massive tool for a tiny project. So yeah, so that's the main thing. How can I know that from whatever side I compare something, or what kind of comparison do I do for the project that I want to build? Which one should I pick? What is the best way to compare all these things from which aspect? None of them is full on one feature, but all of them seem really ideal for what I want to do. Like what is happening, how I make the perfect comparison. So it's not about which one you will use. So don't worry about that, I would suggest. And that's what the experience so far has shown. It's about how you use what you're going to do. The more you identify that you'll be doing some changes during the product development, how easy will it be for you to make those changes? How easy will it be if you start alone in the project and then later on you build a proof of concept and then later on you build a team around that? How painful will it be for someone else to join your project? How easy will it be for them to just start being productive right away? What happens with the visual representation? Like, is it heavily, like the thing you're building, do you really need some eye candies, like have some nice animations and stuff? So if you can combine all these things with whichever you pick, that you can make it in a way that you can onboard people, you can make it production ready really, really fast, that would be the one to go. And of course, if you want to learn something new, it's good to get a tool that seems to support all these quite easily and gives you that kind of new experience. But still, you need to make sure the way that you're going to be using that is not just going to be a boilerplate, something up and running, a few tweaks, or maybe heavy workarounds, because don't forget, not only for you specifically, but anyone onboarding onto a new framework, they don't know yet the best practices. So that's up to how we can split that coupled or like dependency between those projects that will build the main product. We do have a few basic layers like the backend API, have a nice API, a few calls that you can create and then make things work in a way, nice naming way, and a few bunch of common practices and best practices that you can find out there. Then what I usually do, actually what I always do from a few years back, is to build an SDK that will communicate with that API. And that doesn't need to be around any frameworks, and like the least tools you can use in like no framework, like even for tools, the least you can use to build a library like an SDK that will have a new API for what the framework, the representation layer will use. Some of the things will be duplicated, but again, it's about reusing what you commonly do, bundling in one place. I will get into more details later on, but it's like another layer before the framework that you will choose. And probably you will need to make a small plugin right there, which will accommodate, like will go along with the framework. We get a little bit more visual of what I'm trying to explain. We have here, it's like a puzzle, but a little bit more complex than a puzzle. So the first layer with the services API on the top, we need to make sure that the API is flexible enough and supports as many use cases as possible. So usually we try to leave as little as possible restrictions. Like we should allow most of the things to happen. I will take as an example, one of the projects that I was working on recently was a group of communication where you have users joining the group and then establishing audio connections within there, sending text events and images. I didn't need to. Actually, what we never did was to restrict a lot what a user can do within the group, joining, leaving. We had only basic commands to restructure those with events, to restructure the data sets that we had, stateless. And the API was quite, let's say, easy to read, easy to trigger actions, but you could cause inconsistencies really, really easily because you need to know, for example, when you join a conversation, a group, you need to use a member ID, let's say. It's an example that you might need a payload from another call you just did before. It sounds tough to explain that, and it can cause a lot of headaches. So it's very important to have good documentation at every layer. But still, we wouldn't like to restrict those calls, because if you start restricting what you can do, you lose the use cases for later on. So you leave it as wide as open as possible, as flexible. And then you have a client SDK, which is driving that API. So anybody in the future that would like to build another client to talk to your service, they can copy these actions from this SDK. The web, for instance, we did it for web SDK, and then we were driving the teams for iOS and Android. So this is a way to make a client-side library that you can do more things. You can take care of caching, map data that might be a little bit harder. It was harder doing it by yourself from the API with simple calls. But this SDK is a little bit smarter for those use cases that your product needs. Of course, it will start restricting a little bit the use cases or what you can do with direct calls to your REST API, but it's still like another entry point. You might control the REST API by REST calls. You might need that. You might want your clients to build their own tool to tweak or do things around. So the client SDK will have a few more a few use cases, a little bit less than before. It will be more simple for someone to use. So with 2 calls, probably you will be able to initiate the flow that in the direct REST API calls would take 5 calls to get the payloads and then use them somehow. And another common thing would be caching, monitoring, and reporting. Everybody's doing that in every project or in every client. that will be needed. So you detach that logic and you have an SDK where you can use in many, many cases. And still back to our main goal, which was to build a web client, we use that SDK with the framework that we picked earlier. There are going to be a few more limitations there to be introduced. So the framework will need a specific way of some data to be presented. You don't want that logic in the SDK. You don't want to make it specific for a framework. So therefore, you build a plugin, a small, tiny little project that will take care of making more friendly your SDK to the framework that you want to pick. So in this case, let's say we picked Angular or React, the most popular ones at the moment, I think. You can get some kind of inconsistencies between some objects if in JavaScript you are using references or you copy and clone some objects. You can take care of all these things that might cause troubles to your framework within that plugin. And then you use the framework to do what it's meant to do, to display the data that you will provide. It will have some smart logic about caching some bit more the states, holding states for pages that you're using. It will have amazing optimizations. It will have alerts and warnings if you forget area tags or whatever you're not doing well. This way, you rely for what is meant to be the front side to make it more optimal and great without worrying what just happened before getting that kind of data structure that you want to present and how that will interact with the user. All that interaction with the user, of course, is getting filtered again, and it's getting all the way up to the REST API or any API that you have on the server side. In a way that later in the future, you can either split teams and have a team working on the framework. You can get experts that they can do best practices in React or Angular or any framework, and they will be good to go. Like they will have this framework plugin, again, JavaScript, everything is JavaScript. The teams usually work all the stack. So they can jump in, you can do code reviews and pull requests between each individual project, and you can get this kind of consistency and expertise in each layer. So if somebody is more expert on getting how the browser is doing some stuff and how something is optimal for the browser, they can focus on that client SDK to do a proper memory management and everything that is needed. And that is slightly duplicated under the hood in the framework layer, but the only thing you need to do is to make sure that you keep it updated. And then you wouldn't worry too much about those things. So to get an example of a flow, let's say we want to display some users from the API, then you're fetching the data. But in some cases, you might need to do a second call. Let's say you fetch a conversation and then you want a group name, and then you want to bring the members of the group or the details of each member. So the SDK layer is the one that knows these things. They know, the SDK knows that you need 3 calls or how to attach a token, access token, and all these things. And then you can also provide a cache here that you can actually intercept the calls to the network, and you can get some faster results. Then what happens in the next layer would be the data structure. Is everything okay the way that the SDK presented it? Like, is everything working? I mean, is it convenient for the framework to present it? If it is, or if it's not, we want to change that, or we want to create a plugin that will change that structure of the data. If they need change, then we want to do something specific for the framework. We put it in this plugin. If it's not needing any change, so we just fetch the groups and the listing is enough, then we just pass it on to the framework, and then we have this logic in the framework that we have an array and we just display. If we don't need an array and we would prefer to have a set, we communicate with the team that works in the SDK. Is it something that refrain, or is it something that is not good with the best practices that we're thinking, or some other reason that it shouldn't be a set? And they can do it there and then pass it on as what we need for the framework, because more likely it will be a decision that can be applied for any kind of front end tool or framework. Or if it's something that it would be too much work to do in the SDK side, then the team can take that into the plugin for this framework. If we see that in the future we want more front side of facing project need that change, eventually you don't duplicate that, you just move it on the SDK side. So it's like decisions made. If you think about it in code-wise, you create a function to not duplicate your code. It's similar here that you create these kind of layers that you don't duplicate the logic. So you can plug, you can get a client or another app from someone else. Then you just expose the SDK API and they can do the work to present in another way the data. And anytime that you identify that they will need to do the same thing over and over again, you take over that in the SDK layer. So each layer, as I described earlier, it has all these kind of structure that shows here that we have like less conflicts because everything is split into different projects. So we don't get a lot of changes within the same file. It's easier to test because you can test each one of those individually, each one of the layers, and you can build automating tests, you can build deployments, integrations, and everything you need per project. And then you get to reuse that kind of thing for every new client that you want to create, a new client application. I think I confused that client term a few times. And of course, it will make it faster and it will make it easier to switch to another framework or another type, like if you want to use Electron later on, and especially for JavaScript, we have so many choices. And then if you want to create a native project or anything, you just mimic the behavior of the SDK layer to provide that to others. And of course, you can open source that SDK and you get more people working on that and building more. And then the last bit is about the agile processes and how you get that into teams and how that is helpful. If it's split per project, it's more transparent. It's very easy for everybody to jump in the planning session from the product in Jira Confluence. You create a feature description, and then within that description, you can start creating technical pages. That's how we narrow down the scope of the meetings. Actually, it was really, really helpful. You can identify there with developers, you can identify there with developers how to get, you can get a lot of technical details, identify some risks, identify some kind of chunked work that can be made a ticket later on. And then, of course, we move to the Jira board where you can attach from the description or the technical specs, you can attach everything to create a ticket linked to that, and also linked to the GitHub repos and all those integrations that are there for very, very smooth PRs. Version control was the best part because you can create between those projects, you can create a semantic versioning, and that will help you for compatibility, backwards compatibility, everything going back to the API, what version is your SDK, the plugin, and the framework that is using all this kind of structure. And this way you can keep this like neat and very healthy way of providing a product. And then it's not going to be a massive change from one side to the other, like a breaking change to the framework can be absorbed in the plugin layer, so you don't affect the way that you communicate to the backend, and also the other way around. So the main key point of that workflow was to set the acceptance criteria for each project specifically and make the basic test for continuous delivery. So it's up to the team to define in each layer if you're going to provide at least one test or the best case test, so you move on with the PRs. Pretty much, that's what covers all the way that we were planning things. And lastly, the Kanban, which I mentioned earlier. After you set up everything and you have the tickets, the best structure so far that worked for most of the teams was to have the columns to be some of them active and some of them inactive. Each ticket, of course, has the best description for everybody to work. Even if you go on holiday, someone else can pick the ticket and they should find the link on what you were intending to do within the Confluence pages. The first column would be the backlog, having a few tickets, just those that are needed for the next few weeks. We shouldn't put tickets in there just to have them or just to organize. We have the Confluence page for that. So everybody could pick from the backlog, whatever seems more relevant. Depends on the team and the product if you want to have a specific and strict order. I prefer not to. And just keep the momentum of each developer when they want to pick something that seems more related than what they thought before. And then later on, the next column, the backlog is inactive. Then it's active if you move the ticket in verification, which means that you pick a topic and you investigate what else you need to build that to meet the acceptance criteria to say it's done. So you need to have all the information that you can say it's done to work on to make it done. So you gather all the information in that stage. You don't have to immediately start working on that, but you can just then move it to ready for development, and anybody can move it, anybody can pick it up. And that means that you gathered everything that is needed and it's accepted. You had the discussions and the conversation with other teams, and then you move it for ready for development. Then another task is from the ready for development to put it in progress, means that somebody's working on that, code pairing, whatever you want to do, and however it works for you and for this ticket specifically. And then you move it to code review. Ideally, you want each ticket to last for a day, which means that even the code review could happen within the day. If not, you have to chase it up. It's your ticket and your responsibility mainly, and you have the stand-ups and the casual meetings to chase for that. And within the code review, of course, it's up to the team to define the acceptance and the comments. When you create a comment and you want actually the ticket to be merged, but you just don't want to miss something, then you just create another ticket and link it to that. Or if it's something that's going to break, or you worry that's going to break something, then you do a suggestion and not accept. So it shouldn't be merged. Of course, if there's a QA, it's involved in that stage, either before the merge or after, depends on the workflow that you have set up. And after that, you push the ticket to ready for release. Everything is passing and is ready to make a release. Some projects are easy to automate that part as well, when it's ready for release to actually do the release automatically. Some other needs a holding area where you hold and pile up the tickets for that specific version. And the Jira version is actually a really, really good thing, because if you keep a nice title on the ticket, then it gives you directly a change log. So imagine if you have 4 projects just for the front, that sometimes in all projects that I saw, or before joining teams, it was one project for all this front side. It was very hard to say what changed and how it changed and how this is being used. So you can get that from Jira, and the version number, all neat per layer of each project that you build. That's pretty much it. And thank you. And yeah, we'll look for the questions and everything you need. You can find me with this handler everywhere, anywhere. Yeah, that's it.